The truth is, most people misunderstand this. We wander blindly through the labyrinth of modern ambition under the heavy, paralyzing delusion that the architecture of monumental success is a solitary construction project. We romantically worship the myth of the lone wolf, the isolated genius toiling away in a dark, forgotten garage, or the brilliant, ruthless executive who scales the treacherous, glass-walled cliffs of the corporate hierarchy through sheer, unadulterated willpower and singular intellectual dominance. We are heavily, persistently conditioned by a deeply flawed societal narrative that dictates success as a fundamentally individualistic pursuit. A brutal, zero-sum gladiator match where one must fiercely protect their knowledge, aggressively hoard their limited resources, and view every other breathing human being as either a potential competitor to be crushed or an obstacle to be bypassed. But the profound, transformative narrative embedded within the philosophy of this journey violently shatters this ancient myth, exposing it as a tragic, isolating illusion that keeps millions of capable, brilliant individuals trapped in a suffocating state of stagnant mediocrity. The story introduces a powerful, paradigm-shifting archetype, a figure we shall call the connector, whose extraordinary life trajectory completely redefines the mechanical physics of ambition, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the universe does not actually reward isolated talent, it exclusively, disproportionately rewards the profound, empathetic, and highly strategic ability to weave a vast, unbreakable web of genuine human relationships. The narrative origins of the connector do not begin in the glittering, privilege, mahogany-paneled halls of old money, nor do they sprout within the elite, fiercely protected enclaves of high society. They begin in the grimy, unforgiving, and culturally isolated reality of a blue-collar, working-class steel town, where the heavy, suffocating scent of industrial smoke constantly hung thick in the air and the horizons of the exhausted inhabitants were strictly, mercilessly limited by the grueling, bone-crushing shifts at the local manufacturing plant. The connector, as an observant, highly sensitive young boy, watched his father endure agonizing, back-breaking physical labor day after day, willingly sacrificing the vitality of his own body to provide a meager, fragile existence for his family. But the father possessed a singular, extraordinary, and deeply hidden trait that would fundamentally alter the entire trajectory of his son's life, a terrifying, breathtaking audacity, desperate to ensure that his young son would not be permanently trapped in the exact same generational cycle of poverty and physical exhaustion. The father decided to bypass the traditional, rigid, and deeply prejudiced channels of societal authority. He did not simply fill out a hopeful application or quietly pray for a miraculous, unlikely scholarship. He boldly, audaciously approached the immensely wealthy, powerful CEO of the massive steel company, a man who lived in a completely different, seemingly untouchable, and highly guarded universe, and directly, looking the man dead in the eye, asked for a massive personal favor to help his son gain admission to an elite, highly exclusive, and notoriously expensive preparatory academy. To the absolute astonishment of everyone in their small, rigid, and deeply stratified community, the CEO, perhaps disarmed by the raw, unvarnished vulnerability and fierce paternal love driving the request, actually agreed. This singular, incredibly courageous act of reaching across the massive, invisible socioeconomic divide became the foundational, explosive, and most defining lesson in the connector's young life. Analyzing this primal, foundational moment reveals the very first, unbreakable law of building a world-class network, the absolute necessity of audacity. The vast, overwhelming majority of people are completely, hopelessly paralyzed by the terrifying, deeply ingrained fear of rejection. They look at individuals who possess greater wealth, higher social status, or vast, sweeping influence, and they immediately, subconsciously disqualify themselves from ever initiating contact, assuming that their presence would be an unwelcome intrusion. They operate under the toxic assumption that the powerful reside behind impenetrable, electrified walls. But the father's daring move brilliantly illustrates that the barriers between classes, between the powerless and the powerful, are largely conceptual and psychological, constructed entirely of fear. Audacity, therefore, is the absolute first currency of the connector. It is the deep, internal realization that every single person, regardless of their staggering net worth or intimidating corporate title, is fundamentally a human being driven by the exact same primal desires for connection, legacy, and purpose. The CEO did not help the father because he was forced to, he helped because he was presented with a genuine, compelling opportunity to dramatically alter the course of a young boy's life. A deeply rewarding act that his wealth alone could not spontaneously generate. Thrust into the alien, highly polished world of the elite preparatory academy, the young connector quickly realized he was severely outmatched in terms of financial resources and aristocratic pedigree. He did not possess the sprawling trust funds, the ancestral summer homes, or the deeply ingrained, unspoken social codes of his affluent peers. However, instead of retreating into bitter, isolated resentment, he transformed himself into an acute, hypervigilant student of power dynamics. He sought employment as a caddy at the highly exclusive, gated country clubs where the titans of industry, politics, and finance spent their leisure hours, trudging across the manicured, emerald green fairways under the hot sun, carrying heavy leather bags of golf clubs. He was granted invisible, unprecedented access to the inner sanctums of the elite. He watched, with a forensic intensity, how the wealthy actually interacted with one another. He observed that they did not operate in the fierce, cutthroat isolation that the media often portrayed. Rather, they operated within tightly knit, highly collaborative clubs, constantly passing lucrative opportunities, critical information, and vital introductions back and forth with a casual, almost effortless fluidity. He realized, with a sudden, chilling clarity, that deep, systemic poverty is not merely a quantitative lack of financial resources in a bank account, it is, far more devastatingly, a total lack of access to a functional, empowering network. He learned that by simply helping a powerful executive subtly adjust their golf swing, or by carrying their heavy bag with genuine, enthusiastic energy and engaging them in thoughtful, unpretentious conversation, he could instantly forge a profoundly intimate, memorable bond that effortlessly transcended the massive socioeconomic lines separating them. He was no longer just a nameless, faceless servant, he became a trusted confidant, a memorable presence in their highly guarded lives. This crucial phase of observation exposes the profound mechanics of the favor, completely destroying the impoverished, transactional mindset that plagues the working class. In the traditional, scarcity-driven mindset, a favor is viewed as a heavy, dangerous transactional debt, a mathematical obligation that must be carefully, anxiously tracked and immediately repaid to restore the balance of the ledger. But the connector, watching the titans on the golf course, realized that in the realm of the truly successful, a favor is an entirely different biological organism. It is a strategic, joyful investment in a shared, expansive future. It is a binding, emotional agent that creates deep loyalty, mutual growth, and a sprawling web of reciprocal goodwill. The toxic, limiting practice of keeping score, mentally tallying who owes what to whom, is the absolute death of genuine connection. It reduces complex, beautiful human relationships to cold, sterile accounting spreadsheets. The connector learned that true, world-class networking is based entirely on the principle of radical, uncalculated generosity, the act of freely giving immense value, making critical introductions, and offering profound help without the suffocating, immediate expectation of a direct return, fully trusting that massive value inevitably flows dynamically and abundantly back through the arteries of a healthy, well-maintained network. This dynamic flow of goodwill is the true engine of boundless opportunity. As the connector transitioned into the highly competitive, high-stakes arenas of adulthood and prestigious higher education, he carried this profound, hard-won wisdom with him. He arrived at the legendary, ivy-draped halls of Harvard Business School, not as the most brilliant mathematical savant or the most ruthlessly efficient financial modeler, but as the absolute, undisputed master of the human dynamic. While his peers locked themselves in dark, isolated library carrels, desperately memorizing complex economic formulas, the connector was throwing elaborate, carefully curated dinner parties. He realized that the dining table is the ultimate, timeless, and universal human equalizer. He instituted the uncompromising, ironclad personal philosophy that would eventually define his entire existence and become the very title of his life's manifesto: never, under any circumstances, eat a single meal alone. A meal is not merely a biological necessity to consume calories, it is an incredibly rare, unrepeatable, and deeply sacred opportunity to break bread, to lower psychological defenses, and to forge a lasting, empathetic bond. He meticulously filled his sprawling calendar with early morning breakfasts, midday lunches, afternoon coffees, and late-night dinners, ensuring that he was constantly, relentlessly surrounded by a diverse array of people. He was constantly learning their unique, complex stories, uncovering their hidden, unspoken pain points, and deeply understanding their most ambitious, closely guarded dreams. He transformed the solitary, mundane act of eating into a highly strategic, incredibly powerful engine of continuous, expanding human connection, weaving an invisible, indestructible safety net of allies, mentors, and friends that would catch him if he fell and propel him forward when he leapt. This was not the shallow, desperate distribution of glossy business cards, this was the deep, intentional, and profoundly empathetic architecture of a human empire. The dining table was his laboratory, but the true mastery of this art required an architecture of memory that extended far beyond the fading warmth of a shared meal. The narrative shifts its intense gaze to another legendary archetype of connection. A young, staggeringly ambitious student from a modest background in Arkansas who would eventually ascend to the highest, most powerful political office in the world, long before the global spotlight found him. This young man, Bill Clinton, understood a fundamental, mechanical truth about human psychology. People desperately, fundamentally crave to be seen, to be remembered, and to be valued as unique individuals. The story reveals his incredibly meticulous, almost obsessive system of capturing the fleeting details of human interaction. Every single night, regardless of how exhausting the day had been, this young student would sit at his desk with a stack of blank, rigid index cards. He would carefully, deliberately write down the names of the people he had encountered that day. But he did not stop at mere names, he documented the intricate, vital coordinates of their emotional lives. He recorded the names of their spouses, the specific hobbies they were passionate about, the hidden anxieties they had casually mentioned, and the ambitious dreams they harbored for their future. This was not a cold, manipulative database, it was a sprawling, analog tapestry of profound empathy. When a monumental life event occurred for someone in his network, a graduation, a promotion, a personal tragedy, he would immediately reach into this meticulously organized system and send a handwritten note. A warm, perfectly timed gesture of genuine care. Years later, when he launched his seemingly impossible political campaigns, this vast, dormant army of deeply loyal connections, cultivated over decades of handwritten notes and remembered details, rose up to propel him into the White House. Analyzing this staggering political masterclass exposes the tragic flaw in the average person's approach to professional relationships. The overwhelming majority of individuals treat networking as a chaotic, random collision of business cards, hoping that a brief, superficial conversation at a crowded networking mixer will somehow magically translate into a lifelong, lucrative partnership. They rely on their flawed, overwhelmed memories to sustain connections, inevitably allowing valuable relationships to wither and die on the vine of neglect. But the index card method brilliantly illustrates the absolute, non-negotiable necessity of rigorous systemization and relentless follow-up. The magic of human connection is not found in the initial, dazzling spark of the first meeting, it is forged in the slow, unglamorous, and highly disciplined repetition of checking in, offering value, and proving that you actually listened. When the young politician sent a note asking about a person's specific dog by name or inquiring about a child's recent college application, he completely bypassed the cynical, guarded filters of the human ego. He signaled, with undeniable proof, that the person mattered. The profound lesson here is that building a world-class network is not merely an art form requiring charismatic extroversion, it is a highly disciplined, scientifically rigorous practice of continuous, empathetic data management, where the ultimate currency is the demonstrated proof of your absolute, unwavering attention to the details of another human life. Armed with this synthesis of radical audacity, uncalculated generosity, and rigorous systemization, the connector plunged into the chaotic, high-stakes battlefield of the corporate world. The narrative follows him into the grand, echoing ballrooms of massive industry conferences, the very places where careers are supposedly made and fortunes are forged. He observed the tragic, familiar choreography of the average attendee, the nervous, isolated professional standing awkwardly near the buffet table, desperately clutching a lukewarm beverage, aggressively scanning name tags, and launching into rigid, rehearsed elevator pitches that repelled anyone within earshot. They were hunters, desperately trying to bag a high-value target to justify the exorbitant cost of their conference ticket. The connector, however, operated with the lethal, highly strategic precision of a mastermind. He completely rejected the role of the passive attendee and violently seized the role of the ultimate host. Long before the conference even began, he would meticulously scour the attendee list, identifying the fascinating, influential, and innovative minds scheduled to appear. He would then audaciously reach out to them, bypassing the sterile official schedule, and organize intimate, highly curated private dinner parties at the very best restaurants in the host city. He became the conference commando, a rogue agent of connection who transformed the overwhelming, impersonal scale of a massive corporate event into a series of deeply intimate, highly memorable salons, by inviting a diverse, electric mix of journalists, established executives, and hungry innovators to break bread together. He created a localized epicenter of gravity. He did not ask for anything in return for these masterful orchestrations. His absolute, singular goal was simply to be the invisible, vital connective tissue that bound these brilliant minds together. This strategic maneuver violently deconstructs the traditional, exhausted paradigm of professional advancement and introduces the incredibly powerful concept of becoming a hub. In any vast, complex network, whether it is a computer grid, a neurological system, or a human society, the absolute most valuable, indispensable points are the central hubs, the vital nodes through which the vast majority of information, energy, and opportunity must flow. The average, terrified professional desperately tries to attach themselves as a weak, isolated spoke to someone else's powerful hub. But the connector brilliantly understood that true, unassailable power lies in actively constructing the hub yourself. When you generously, effortlessly introduce two brilliant individuals who subsequently launch a massive, world-changing venture together, you do not lose your own value, your intrinsic value within that network exponentially, permanently skyrockets. You become known as the ultimate catalyst, the trusted, indispensable gatekeeper of serendipity. The conference commando strategy completely eradicates the foul, desperate stench of neediness that suffocates most networking efforts. Because the connector was focused entirely on providing an incredible, highly curated experience for his guests, he completely disarmed their natural, highly evolved defenses against corporate solicitation. He proved that the fastest, most reliable trajectory to becoming incredibly influential is to actively, relentlessly focus on increasing the influence, success, and connectivity of absolutely everyone around you. However, the ultimate, most profound secret weapon in the connector's sprawling arsenal was not his relentless scheduling, his meticulous index cards, or his masterful dinner parties. It was something far more terrifying, deeply counterintuitive, and entirely absent from the sterile, sanitized playbooks of corporate behavior. Absolute, unvarnished vulnerability. In the fierce, hyper-competitive arenas of modern business, individuals are heavily conditioned to construct thick, impenetrable suits of psychological armor. They present highly curated, flawless avatars to the world, projecting an illusion of constant, unwavering success, hiding their crushing failures, their paralyzing anxieties, and their deep, hidden passions behind a mask of professional stoicism. They falsely believe that displaying any form of weakness or deep emotion will be weaponized against them by ruthless competitors. But the connector, in a supreme act of emotional courage, completely discarded this heavy, suffocating armor. He realized that polished, flawless perfection is incredibly boring, fundamentally intimidating, and deeply alienating. When he sat down at a table, He did not launch into a sterile recitation of his impressive resume, he boldly shared his spectacular failures, his deeply personal struggles, and his authentic, sometimes messy passions. He spoke of the stinging rejections he had faced, the terrifying moments of self-doubt that kept him awake at night, and the raw, unpolished dreams that truly drove his ambition. This radical, terrifying honesty acted as an emotional skeleton key, instantly unlocking the heavily guarded vaults of the people he interacted with. When he exposed his own soft, vulnerable underbelly, it gave the titans of industry, the hardened executives, and the skeptical journalists the subconscious, desperate permission to finally drop their own exhausting, heavy masks. The sterile, transactional business meeting instantly, miraculously transformed into a profound, deeply human confession. They bonded not over soaring profit margins or synergistic corporate strategies, but over the shared, universal, and incredibly difficult experience of simply being human. They discovered shared passions for obscure charities, mutual anxieties about raising children in a chaotic world, and common scars from past professional betrayals. Analyzing this profound psychological dynamic reveals the ultimate, absolute core of why the Connector's methodology is so staggeringly effective. We are biologically, evolutionarily wired to seek out authentic, emotionally resonant human tribes for our fundamental survival. A network built entirely on the fragile, shifting sands of mutual professional utility is incredibly weak the very moment the immediate, transactional usefulness vanishes. The relationship instantly, completely dissolves. But a network forged in the searing, intense fires of shared vulnerability, mutual trust, and deep emotional resonance is virtually indestructible. It transforms mere professional contacts into fiercely loyal allies who will defend you in dark rooms and champion your cause when you are entirely absent. The Connector's radical vulnerability completely destroys the myth that professionalism requires the total suppression of humanity. It proves that the absolute strongest, most unyielding business bonds are, in fact, deeply personal. When you invite someone into the messy, unpolished reality of your actual life, you elevate them from a mere utility to a valued, cherished confidant. This emotional intimacy is the absolute, unquestionable superglue of the universe. It is the secret, invisible force that turns a vast, sprawling collection of business cards into a living, breathing, and fiercely protective human shield. The Connector had successfully hacked the deepest, most primal operating system of the human brain, bypassing the cynical, calculating prefrontal cortex and directly, powerfully engaging the deep, emotional centers of trust and tribal loyalty. He had built a massive, global empire not by conquering others, but by fiercely, courageously loving them. This profound, deeply transformative emotional resonance creates an unparalleled, almost magical ripple effect that violently, beautifully disrupts the standard, sterile mechanics of the traditional corporate ladder. When the Connector enters a room, he does not merely bring his isolated, individual talents, he brings the staggering, combined weight, the accumulated brilliance, and the fiercely protective loyalty of thousands of deeply interconnected souls who absolutely, unconditionally want to see him win. This is the staggering, magnificent, and entirely terrifying power of a fully actualized, deeply human network. The solitary, isolated genius, no matter how mathematically brilliant or ruthlessly efficient, simply cannot compete with the sheer, overwhelming, and tidal force of a highly coordinated, deeply empathetic, and radically vulnerable human hive. The individual who masters this profound art does not just build a successful, lucrative career, they architect an entirely new, unassailable, and deeply joyous reality where every single interaction is pregnant with the miraculous possibility of massive, sudden, and life-altering serendipity. The journey from the grimy, smoke-filled steel town to the absolute pinnacle of global influence was not paved with cutthroat, solitary competition, but with the warm, generous, and unyielding strength of thousands of outstretched hands. The narrative meticulously paints this process not as a series of manipulative, Machiavellian tactics designed to extract value from unsuspecting targets, but as a deeply spiritual, incredibly demanding practice of radical self-expansion. To become a true Connector, One must fundamentally, completely annihilate the fragile, insecure ego that whispers toxic lies about scarcity and competition. One must deeply, fundamentally believe that the universe of opportunity is entirely infinite, and that another person's brilliant, spectacular victory does not in any way diminish your own potential, but rather vastly expands the collective, glowing horizon for absolutely everyone involved. The connector views the world not as a battlefield of finite resources, but as an infinite, boundless garden, where every single introduction is a seed planted, every shared meal is water poured, and every moment of shared vulnerability is the brilliant, life-giving sunlight. By continuously, relentlessly nourishing this vast, sprawling garden, the connector eventually, inevitably finds themselves living in a lush, incredibly abundant, and deeply joyous paradise of their own magnificent creation, forever insulated from the cold, terrifying isolation of the solitary climb. The sprawling, magnificent garden of human connection, once meticulously planted and fiercely nourished by the shared meals and radical vulnerability of the connector, is unfortunately completely subject to the exact same unforgiving, destructive laws of universal entropy that govern the physical world. The connector understands a terrifying, fundamental biological truth that the vast majority of ambitious professionals tragically ignore. A human relationship is absolutely not a static, carved marble monument that stands perfectly preserved for eternity once it is successfully established. It is, instead, a fragile, living, breathing, and highly volatile biological organism that demands constant, rhythmic, and incredibly deliberate caloric nourishment, lest it quietly wither, decay, and completely evaporate into the cold, silent abyss of forgotten memories. The average individual attends a brilliant networking event, exchanges a few highly energetic, promising conversations, collects a handful of glossy business cards, and then returns to their isolated cubicle, allowing months or even years of absolute, deafening silence to pass before desperately reaching out only when they critically need a massive favor. This transactional, parasitic approach completely destroys the delicate fabric of trust. To combat this relentless, corrosive decay of time and distance, the connector introduces a masterfully elegant, entirely frictionless, and incredibly powerful systematic mechanism known as the art of the ping. The ping is absolutely not a heavy, burdensome, or desperate plea for immediate assistance. It is a rapid, lightweight, incredibly thoughtful, and highly strategic transmission of pure, unadulterated value. It is the simple, profound act of forwarding a highly relevant, deeply insightful industry article to a former colleague with a brief, personalized note indicating that their specific, unique brilliance immediately came to mind. It is a rapid, joyous congratulatory message sent the very millisecond a contact's breathtaking promotion is publicly announced. It is the simple, profound acknowledgement of a shared, cherished memory or the thoughtful celebration of a child's recent graduation. The connector transforms their entire daily routine into a relentless, rhythmic, and perfectly synchronized symphony of these tiny, brilliant, and deeply empathetic pings, constantly touching the outer, fraying edges of their massive, global network with the gentle, life-giving water of genuine human attention. Analyzing the profound, staggering psychological mechanics of the ping completely revolutionizes our understanding of how the human brain actually processes and prioritizes complex social hierarchies. The human mind, constantly bombarded by a deafening, overwhelming avalanche of modern digital information, relies heavily on the psychological principle of the availability heuristic. It unconsciously, automatically elevates and favors the most recently, consistently, and positively activated nodes within its vast memory banks. By mastering the graceful, frictionless, and entirely selfless art of the ping, the connector brilliant circumvents the heavy, terrifying, and often paralyzing social expectation of arranging a massive, time-consuming reunion. They keep their name, their unique energy, and their undeniable, profound value at the absolute, glittering forefront of their entire network's collective, subconscious awareness. When a sudden, massive, and completely life-altering opportunity spontaneously arises in a closed-door executive boardroom, the individuals making the critical decisions do not frantically scour the internet for strangers. They instantly, Instinctively reach out to the person who has been consistently, quietly, and generously whispering value into their lives for the past 3 years. The ping mathematically ensures that the connector is always, without fail, the very first name joyously whispered when fortunes are being made, completely eradicating the terrifying, silent death of being professionally forgotten. However, the connector, operating at the absolute, dizzying zenith of strategic brilliance, intimately knows that meticulously building every single individual spoke of a massive, global wheel completely from scratch is mathematically impossible, biologically exhausting, and tragically inefficient. To truly scale their influence to a monumental, world-altering level, they must completely abandon the grueling, linear progression of one-on-one networking and aggressively, audaciously seek out the master architects of modern society, the superconnectors. These incredibly rare, extraordinarily powerful individuals are the elite corporate headhunters, the heavily entrenched political lobbyists, the seasoned, highly influential journalists, and the masterful public relations maestros. The superconnectors do not merely possess a sprawling, impressive network, they fundamentally, literally are the network. They are the massive, beating hearts of their respective industries, the vital, central switching stations through which all critical information, exclusive capital, and elite talent must ultimately flow. The average, terrified professional is completely intimidated by these towering figures, incorrectly assuming they are entirely unapproachable. But the connector approaches the superconnector not with a desperate, trembling begging bowl, but with an incredibly bold, highly curated offering of massive, undeniable, and immediate value. They understand that the absolute primary currency of the superconnector is access to reliable, brilliant, and fiercely loyal new talent. By seamlessly, successfully integrating themselves with a single, highly vetted superconnector, and by proving themselves to be a trustworthy, indispensable, and fiercely protective asset to that individual's own agenda, the connector instantly, miraculously, and exponentially inherits direct, unfettered access to thousands of highly guarded, immensely powerful individuals. This breathtaking strategic maneuver completely destroys the slow, agonizing myth of climbing the corporate ladder rung by exhausting rung. The psychology of the superconnector is built entirely on the continuous, rapid brokering of high-level trust. When the connector deeply, authentically serves the superconnector, solving their complex problems and generously feeding their sprawling network with fresh, brilliant ideas, the superconnector naturally, aggressively begins to champion the connector in rooms they could never previously enter. Success in the modern world is absolutely not a slow, linear mathematical equation, it is a violent, beautiful, and staggering exponential explosion that occurs the very millisecond you successfully plug your own vibrant, localized network directly into the massive, roaring, and highly electrified mainframe of a superconnector's universe. The connector stops desperately trying to open every single heavy, locked door by themselves, and instead simply befriends the ultimate, trusted gatekeeper who effortlessly holds all the master keys. Yet, as the connector inevitably, triumphantly ascends into the incredibly thin, highly dangerous, and deeply intoxicating air of extreme, unprecedented success, a new, entirely silent, and deeply fatal enemy begins to aggressively circle their towering empire, the terrifying, blinding isolation of the echo chamber, the tragic, inescapable reality of possessing massive wealth, sweeping influence, and towering corporate authority is that the surrounding environment quickly, insidiously becomes distorted. The successful are constantly, relentlessly besieged by vast, smiling armies of sycophants, yes men, and opportunistic flatterers, individuals who are absolutely, fundamentally terrified of delivering harsh, deeply necessary, and highly critical truths. To actively, violently combat this fatal, blinding psychological distortion, the connector meticulously, carefully constructs their ultimate, most fiercely protected inner sanctum, the personal board of advisors. These chosen individuals are absolutely not necessarily people operating within the exact same specific industry. Nor are they individuals who can offer immediate, lucrative financial leverage. They are deeply trusted, fiercely honest, and incredibly grounded mentors, childhood peers, and lifelong friends who possess the absolute, unquestionable, and heavily protected authority to ruthlessly critique, violently challenge, and completely dismantle the connector's deeply flawed ideas without the slightest lingering fear of professional or personal retribution. They are the designated, trusted truth-tellers, the heavy, necessary anchors that keep the soaring, ambitious balloon of the connector's ego firmly, safely tethered to the harsh, unforgiving ground of objective reality. Analyzing the immense, life-saving power of the personal board of advisors exposes the incredibly tragic, deeply predictable downfall of the solitary, isolated genius, the lone wolf. Lacking this fiercely protected, brutally honest feedback loop, almost always suffers a catastrophic, highly public failure of perspective. They begin to deeply, truly believe their own intoxicating, flawless press releases. They drink their own toxic, isolating Kool-Aid. The personal board of advisors acts as an impenetrable, highly aggressive psychological immune system for the soul of the ambitious leader. It proves, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that ultimate, enduring leadership is absolutely not about possessing a flawless, omniscient, and entirely unyielding personal judgment. It is, conversely, about having the profound, breathtaking humility to voluntarily submit your most treasured, highly guarded visions to the rigorous, ruthless, and often painful stress testing of people who truly love you enough to look you dead in the eye and tell you that you are entirely, dangerously wrong. This radical, ongoing submission to external, deeply trusted wisdom is the only known mechanism that successfully prevents catastrophic, ego-driven ruin and ensures continuous, grounded, and deeply human evolution at the absolute highest, most dizzying pinnacles of global power. Finally, the grand, sweeping narrative reaches its ultimate, breathtaking culmination. The connector has successfully, flawlessly architected a massive, unbreakable, and globally spanning human empire. They have absolutely mastered the delicate, rhythmic art of the ping. They have deeply, seamlessly integrated with the towering superconnectors, and they have heavily fortified their own vulnerable psychology with a fierce, uncompromising board of advisors. They have reached the absolute, undeniable zenith of their sweeping power. They are no longer just a mere participant scrambling within the market. They have effectively, undeniably become the market itself. But it is precisely here, at the absolute summit of the mountain, that the underlying philosophy reveals its final, most breathtaking, and deeply spiritual secret. The ultimate, highest purpose of acquiring this staggering, monumental, and incredibly dense concentration of human influence is absolutely not to hoard it like a terrified, sleeping dragon in a heavily fortified, deeply selfish, and isolated ivory tower. The true, absolute master of the network understands a profound, beautiful paradox that completely defies standard economic logic. True, enduring human power only multiplies, deepens, and becomes truly immortal when it is aggressively, joyfully, and completely given away. The connector shifts their entire, massive focus from aggressive acquisition to fierce, dedicated, and deeply compassionate mentorship. They begin to actively, relentlessly seek out the young, the desperately hungry, the systemically marginalized, and the incredibly brilliant individuals who are currently trapped in the exact same grimy, smoke-filled, and deeply restrictive realities from which the connector themselves originally escaped. They become the immensely powerful, generous CEO who once, long ago, completely altered the trajectory of a terrified, working-class father's life. They open the heavy, locked doors. They freely share the deeply guarded secrets, and they aggressively pour their massive, accumulated social capital into the empty, eager cups of the next generation. The entire, arduous journey of building the network ultimately, beautifully transforms from a desperate, frantic pursuit of personal success into a profound, deeply spiritual crusade of radical, uplifting significance. The ultimate, earth-shattering meaning that this profound, transformative narrative fiercely intends to convey to its readers is a complete, violent, and incredibly beautiful revolution against the toxic, isolating myth of individualistic, cutthroat success. The core, beating message is that the true, undeniable currency of the universe is not hoarded capital, isolated intelligence, or ruthless competition, but radical generosity, deep, unvarnished vulnerability, and the relentless, joyous cultivation of authentic human connection. The book serves as a profound, transformative psychological and structural blueprint, teaching that by aggressively abandoning the scorekeeping mentality, deliberately designing your life around shared, intimate experiences, and dedicating your entire existence to making absolutely everyone around you significantly more successful, you can engineer an entirely new, unassailable reality where failure becomes mathematically impossible because you are supported by an unbreakable web of love and loyalty. The final, transcendent lesson is one of radical, beautiful empowerment. You do not climb to the top of the mountain to stand alone and look down at the world. You climb to the top of the mountain so you can throw down 1,000 heavy ropes and pull everyone else up with you. Your net worth will forever be the exact, undeniable reflection of your network.